Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. 2 years ago this spring, a trio of advocacy organizations launched a campaign they called Close the Workhouse. Now, that name refers, of course, to the city's medium security institution. It's a jail that long ago earned the Dickensian nickname, the Workhouse. Action St. Louis, Arch City Defenders, and the Bail Project came together to pressure public officials to close down this jail. They wanted to see all of the city's detainees in the more modern Justice Center downtown. Now, last week, they achieved a major victory, but the battle's not over yet. And joining me with the latest is Kayla Reed. She's the Executive Director of Action St. Louis. Kayla, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me.
So you went into last week's Board of Aldermen convinced you had the votes for a budget amendment targeting the Workhouse. Just to set up this debate, what was the idea behind that amendment?
Well, certainly. So, we announced a couple weeks ago, around June 16th, that after months and months of conversations with the alders, that we had majority support for an initiative to defund the Workhouse. We announced that we had 14. Currently, the Board of Aldermen has 2 less seats from the vacancies. Mm-hmm. And so what we were moving to was the St. Louis City was in the midst of its budget process for fiscal year 21. And we know that process wraps up at the end of June. And so we were in the process of getting an amendment introduced to the budget to fully defund the Workhouse. Amendments happen at the committee level. And so we had Alderwoman Kara Spencer attempt to introduce an amendment at the Ways and Means Committee that would have defunded the budget line items that make up the remaining $8 million for the Medium Security Institute.
So why handle this as a budget amendment? Why not just have a separate proposal to close the Workhouse? Was this a way to force the mayor's hand on this?
Yeah, so I think, when you're in a campaign, you're looking at multiple different lanes of strategy. And so if you remember at the top of the year, we had a a resolution in front of the Public Safety Committee in which we testified at several hearings we packed the room in support of calling on the Board of E&A to defund the Workhouse, to close the Workhouse ahead of the budget process really taking off. And so, this was quite honestly years in the making that we were moving toward. We were also, internally writing an ordinance that we were looking for a sponsor that would create the process to close the jail and then create the fund that would reinvest into communities. We didn't get that ordinance introduced, but we did have the resolution pre-Rona from in front of the Public Safety Committee. So that didn't take a vote. Then we went down because of the coronavirus. And so, the timeline created what we felt like a sense of urgency that we needed to kind of go toward really pressuring the conversation around the budget. We saw that the budget was cut in half when the new proposed budget was released, that we went from 16 million to 8 million. And also we knew that we were at this critically low population in the Medium Security Institute. It's been less than 100 folks for well over a month. And so there is room at the CJC, and we know that there's a larger conversation around pretrial detainees and cash bail that we need to continue to have. Mm-hmm. But we felt like that because of those different factors, that going after the budget was the best option in the timeline. Because if we didn't get it done before, 6:30, we were looking at having to have this conversation into 2021. And there's a lot more, there are a lot of other issues that our organizations want to be able to focus on. And it was time to get this done after 2.5 years.
And you had some major support for this. And yet this amendment never ended up getting an up or down vote. What happened there? Kayla? Kayla, are you still there? I think we may have lost Kayla. We're going to work on getting her back as soon as possible. Obviously, I'm super interested in the answer to that question, and I'm hoping that she'll be with us shortly to address it. And for those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about the campaign to close the city's workhouse, and we're talking to Kayla Reed, who's the Executive Director of Action St. Louis. She's been one of the people who's been absolutely instrumental in pushing this issue over the years, bringing it to the fore. As she said, they have this amendment. They were pretty sure that they had the votes they needed to get this pushed through as a big cut to the budget. As Kayla mentioned there, originally the workhouse was costing about $6 million a year, or $16 million a year. In this most recent budget, the mayor had put it at $8 million. And so this amendment that Kayla was working on pushing would have taken that $8 million and stripped that away from the workhouse. And the idea was that then the mayor would be forced to close this jail, which at this point she has not indicated her support for being ready to close it. So that sort of sets the stakes on where we were. I understand that we might be getting Kayla back here in just a second. For all of you tired of hearing me talking, I'm tired of hearing me talking too. And I understand Kayla's now with us. Kayla, you there?
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Boy, you cut out at such a high suspense moment because you were sort of outlining why you had gone the route of this budget amendment. This was the time you wanted to get this done, looking into this next fiscal year. So then what happened? Why were you not able to get that passed as a budget amendment?
Yeah, so, I mean, it wasn't able to be introduced within committee. And then so what we moved forward toward was a kind of budget substitution on the full floor of the Board of Aldermen, and we saw Alderman Brett Narayan introduce that budget substitution, which, was essentially the same budget but had the line items that make up the Medium Security Institute subtracted. And so that was debated on the floor for several hours. Different alders rose in support or in opposition of it. And eventually what took place was that it was moved because of a language in the charter. It was moved to the informal calendar. We kind of ran up against the clock. And the truth is that we ran up against the clock. And so we weren't able to get that voted on before the 6:30 deadline, the June 30th deadline, when the kind of proposed budget goes into effect.
And that must have just been a huge disappointment for you.
Yeah, that day was sort of a whiplash, honestly, from the perspective of the organizing team, because it was a momentous announcement to say we had the majority of the Board of Alders supporting it, and we watched as people rose in support, really calling into question why we were still, why we would even choose to spend an additional $7 to $8 million on a facility that had less than 100 folks in it. And we knew that the math was there to support a moving from MSI to CJC. And the city was facing a massive budget gap because of the impact of coronavirus. So we saw half the budget be taken away very quickly and effortlessly moved into other things. And so, the political will, I think, was on the side of the campaign, and the community was in full support of it. This same day there was a rally outside City Hall that later that same afternoon where this bill wasn't voted on and folks were rallying outside. We saw the mayor dox protesters, including staff of Action St. Louis, who are releasing their personal information on Facebook Live. And so that day was just really intense for the campaign on multiple fronts.
So it felt like you were building to something big there, as you said, just very disappointing because this felt like such a good shot. But yet, then something last week happened that I think have given people who want to see this workhouse closed, it's given them a lot of hope moving forward. And that is this bill that has been introduced by Aldermanic President Lewis Reed. Tell me what this bill would do.
Yeah, so this bill does two things. Board Bill 92, it creates a process to formally close MSI. So it would close the workhouse. And what it creates is what the remaining money that was allocated to the facility, minus things that take care of the formal process of closing it, staff costs, and other things, a fund that would move through a participatory process to invest into what the bill currently calls it a neighborhood crime reduction fund, and creates the Division of Recidivism Reduction that essentially works to
help folks who are being arrested and held pretrial, who have what we call these kind of underlying social determinants of crime, and then move resources into the communities by which folks who are most impacted by issues of violence are able to resource and find alternatives and supportive services that they want in their communities toward addressing those issues.
Now, I understand there's a couple of different points where you'd like to see some changes to this bill, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But overall, does this bill do what you are hoping will happen here with the Workhouse?
Yeah, I mean, we have the release of amendments from the Close the Workhouse campaign. I think we released about 10 overall. Myself and Blake Strode and Mike Milton and the campaign team have worked to, we've read this. I probably read it 100 times. And what I will say is that it does speak to a lot of what the campaign over the last 2 years has been lifting up, that the call to close the Workhouse is not just simply about closing the facility. It is a conversation about pretrial detention at large. It is a conversation about how we think about detainee populations in the city of St. Louis and how we spend our money in the carceral system here locally. But it also has always stood up a conversation about reinvesting in community. So it's, the motto has been close the Workhouse and reinvest that $16 million into community. And at its bones and overall, this bill gets to that. We have some specifics that we would like to see changed, particularly around, in one part of the bill, it says that the division that would be created would be for detainees who suffer from mental illness. Well, yeah, that's one part of the population that is impacted by, being arrested and incarcerated. But also we know that we're seeing folks in the Workhouse and in the CJC who are dealing with substance addiction and other kind of correlated social factors along the lines of poverty. We hear people constantly say this, poverty is the root of crime, but we need to make sure that the division that's created has kind of that holistic approach so that we're going wide and not very narrow and not making a substantial impact on the pretrial population in our city.
Mm-hmm. It's not just about mental health. There's sort of a host of issues that go along with that, is what you're saying.
Precisely.
Okay.
Precisely. But creating the division, which we want to be renamed the Division of Supportive Reentry, and part of the reason that we want that is this idea that we are creating the division that is about support, right, and that recidivism reduction gets at a lot of things. It also presumes guilt. And what we are talking about is that these folks are being held in this jail pre-trial. They have not been convicted, and that we want to facilitate supportive reentry into the broader community. We want to make sure that, folks are not coming out of jail into further devastation, and that's pushing them further into committing crimes of poverty to resource themselves. And so we're really trying to make sure that this bill holds that holistic analysis. And we're confident that the administration, that President Reed and his team have seen these amendments. We've talked about them several times, and that they're going to be introduced. And we are going to work to ensure that they are passed through committee so that the total bill that goes to the floor to be voted on integrates this kind of holistic approach that our campaign has always lifted up.
So your sense is that they are on board for some of these amendments, or some of the idea behind some of these amendments that your groups are pushing, these changes?
That is my assessment, yes. And, they're going to introduce the amendments, and I think that is what we have to continue to organize beyond. This isn't anything that President Reed alone can pass, and so it's going to go before the Public Safety Committee. There's a hearing tomorrow. And the Public Safety Committee will vote on each of these amendments. And so our work is to make sure that we have the majority votes on the Public Safety Committee so that when it goes to the full floor, it holds this new language that we've introduced and pushed out to the broader public.
We're talking to Kayla Reed. She's the Executive Director of Action St. Louis, about the campaign to close the city's Workhouse, which she has spent so much time on in the last couple of years and appears to finally be very close to its goal. We need to take a quick break, but we're going to come back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. That's 90.7 KWMU. Welcome back. We're talking about the campaign to close the city's Workhouse, and my guest today is Kayla Reed. She's an organizer with the campaign that has been going on now for several years, as well as the Executive Director of Action St. Louis. Now, Kayla, Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards was on this show 2 weeks ago, and again, this was just 2 weeks ago. I asked him then about closing the Workhouse, and here is what he told me.
the medium security institution does not necessarily house medium security detainees or people that are charged with crimes. In fact, we have no one that's housed at the medium security institution that is charged with a misdemeanor. We have no one there that's charged with low-level felonies. In fact, the people that are housed at the medium security institution today are people that have been charged with murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, rapes, and robberies. Those robberies also include carjackings. We have lots of people there that have been charged with assault in the first degree. And so I think what is happening in terms of how people are inferring what's happening at the workhouse, they just make an assumption that it is a low-level facility. It is not a low-level facility. With respect to the number of folk there, of course, we are under our COVID protocol, so we're not moving detainees or defendants or folk that are charged with crimes around. There are probably about 60 people that should be in the medium security institution right now that we've not moved because of our COVID protocol.
You don't want to transfer germs between these two jails. Okay.
Absolutely. And so we have held off with respect to that. Moreover, our COVID protocol has allowed the court system and our prosecutors and our defense lawyers to put nearly 400 people back on the street that I believe ought to be locked up due to public safety and because of the public safety risk. But that's a conversation for another hour or so. But the point here is that we need the beds. We are not in a position that we can take those beds out of our criminal justice correction umbrella because I suspect that it's just a matter of time that we may have more detainees than we have beds.
Okay. So you feel like you're going to need that. You can't just put people in the Justice Center and close this down because that number could go back up.
That is correct. I expect that there will be a surge.
Okay. And why do you think there'll be a surge?
Well, I expect that there will be a surge because right now we are rearresting people that have been released under the COVID protocol. We have rearrested nearly 70, maybe between 70 and 100 people that were released, and we have rearrested some several times.
And that is Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards speaking on our show about 2 weeks ago. Kayla Reed, there's obviously a lot to unpack there, but it seems like the gist of what he's saying is we need the beds. We're going to need these beds going forward because we have more people that we need to jail. What's your response to that?
I think that that's incorrect, and we've maintained that as a campaign since the beginning. I think, Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards relies on a lot of fear-mongering language to incite folks into believing that we need to have two jails in the city with 300,000 people and a dwindling population, and we just fundamentally disagree with that. So we've heard him use that talking point a few times, and our focus again is that if we run the numbers, then the numbers don't lie. There is a federal contract that the city has entered in where we've seen a drastic increase in the number of folks who are being held in the CJC downtown. Who don't have to be held there. That's about 200 beds.
These are not the city's arrestees. These are federal people. The city is getting paid to house them. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. And honestly, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. So if we are not holding that population of folks, if they are going to another facility and they can't go to the workhouse, right, because the workhouse doesn't meet federal standards, then those beds would be free in the CJC. Moreover, even if, half of that population, even if you didn't get rid of the entire federal detainee population and you moved just enough to clear out the workhouse, there still be beds there. There are beds there now. And so, again, this rhetoric around, we're talking about people who are charged, who are held pretrial. This is a constitutional matter. Folks are not held, if a judge decides that there is a bail amount, it should be within reach of a person's ability to pay. And what has happened is that St. Louis has created a system where the bail amount is always out of reach. And that's why our pretrial detention is so high. One of our partners, our city filed a bail suit last year. We saw the potential for the city to move at a rate that it actually lets more people out on their own recognizance and actually moves quickly on lowering bail amounts so that folks are able to not be held pretrial. And when we saw that kind of system move at the rate that it should be, we saw the population of the workhouse steadily start to decline. And so really having two jails allows the system to move slow enough where we're holding people. When we started this campaign, Sarah, folks were in the workhouse for 291 days. That was the average length of stay. They had not been convicted of a crime. They were being held, they had been charged, and they were being held pretrial.
Waiting for their day in court.
The likelihood. Right. You're increasing the likelihood that someone's going to take a plea deal just to get out with time served. You're increasing the likelihood that someone's going to come out whenever the trial is over if they're getting, and most of the folks from our research were given probation anyway. So now they're being released after almost a year in this facility with probably new mental health issues, new issues of poverty. They don't have housing. Their families, situations, and dynamics have shifted. The economic strain is creating its own source of problems. And then you're watching people do what they have to do to survive. And so I think, the conversations around if the people in the facilities were just the folks who were committing these kind of crimes that Jimmy Edwards continuously lifts up, which again, I think is fear-mongering, they would fit into the City Justice Center. And because we still have people in the workhouse, it is a fundamental issue of the pretrial system, but moreover, that federal contract is exacerbating the problem. And even with the federal contract, we have enough space in the City Justice Center to move folks over. And what we save is more than what we make from that federal contract. And so the numbers are there, the moral argument is there, and we've been making this argument for 2 years. And so now we're going to go through the legislative process once more to present this case to our legislative body, our most direct representatives. And our hope is that this facility will be closed by the end of the year. And the steps that need to be taken to keep that this will actually increase the likelihood that our communities will be safe, and that those resources, instead of spending them to lock folks up, will be invested into the services that our communities desperately, desperately need.
It's interesting. I have heard a number of aldermen say that the city is actually losing money on these federal detainees that it's agreeing to house, that this would be something that rather than costing the city money to cancel that federal contract, that it would actually be making the city money. And it's interesting that we seem so attached to that when, as you're saying, this is something that's a loser for the city, financially speaking. We also reached out to Mayor Lyda Cruz, and we wanted to see if her position on the workhouse had changed since Judge Edwards was on the show a few weeks ago. And her spokesman gave us a statement that said this: Mayor Lyda Cruz has made it very clear she does not support putting dangerous criminals back on the streets, but she does support a comprehensive, safe, and deliberate evaluation and study of more potentially efficient uses of government resources. In fact, Mayor Cruz is on the record saying the city is already working towards rethinking its correctional facilities that could possibly include operating only a single facility. But in order to get there, Mayor Cruz has a duty to ensure the city responsibly balances the safety of the community at large with all of its many obligations under the law to house detainees on serious and violent felony charges. Just arbitrarily setting dates and deadlines for closing MSI, again, that's the workhouse, without taking all of this into account does not get us a safer St. Louis. Are you worried that even if you can get all the votes for this plan at the Board of Aldermen, she might veto it?
Yeah, so the intro language to Board Bill 92 actually cites a part of the charter, Section 25, Article 25, Section 1, that requires a higher number. So actually the kind of votes that are required to pass this are the same amount that are necessary to override a veto from the mayor. So
she may end up with no say in this.
Yeah, and the truth is she's had 2 years to say a lot, and she said nothing. She could have organized this plan that this bill speaks to without having to go through the Board of Aldermen at all. She could have led the charge on this, and what she's done is fall back on that, fear-mongering rhetoric, same as Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards, to avoid the conversation. The numbers have dwindled. The resources are desperately needed in communities, and that is how you're going to get that's how you're going to see a decrease in crime, is when resources are invested. And we've made this argument for 2.5 years. We met with the mayor a few weeks ago before we even knew that Board Bill 92 was being introduced. We talked about the amendment to defund the jail that was in the Ways and Means Committee. We've asked several times for the mayor's support. The refusal to acknowledge that this is actually what leadership requires in this moment is disheartening, especially Again, this is in the shadow of her doxing protesters, including staff of this organization, the very same day that the substitution was introduced to the full floor. And so we understand that the mayor is not on our side on this, but the people have spoken. The campaign is going to be vigilant about getting this bill passed, and we are hopeful that the support that we've already had at the Board of Aldermen is going to grow, and that President Reed and other folks, including Alderwoman Kara Spencer, Alderwoman Megan Green, Alderman Brandon Bosley, Alderwoman Shamim Clark Hubbard, and Alderman Dan Gunther, Jesse Todd, Brett Narayan, Sarah Martin, Heather Navarro, the many folks who have been in this conversation for months and years are going to lead this to completion.
I want to ask you about one more thing, and that is some of your critics on the Board of Aldermen have noted that some of the voices that have been loudest in pushing for this workhouse closure are white. Why has it been so hard to garner support from aldermen on the North Side, do you think?
Our work is to garner support from the community. And so we spent months in North City, months of this campaign in the last year knocking doors. We hired people who were formerly detained in the workhouse, paid them a living wage, and they went to work and they knocked over 10,000 doors. They've talked to thousands of people in wards, and there is a real conversation and a real desire to see this facility close. This facility has impacted thousands of Black families in this region, my family, the family of multiple people on this campaign. The leadership of this campaign is Black, and I grew up in North City, and so our work is to ensure that people are participating in this process. And we have had support, right? We have had support of Alderman Jesse Todd, Alderwoman Shamim Clark Hubbard, Alderman Brandon Bosley. We saw, new support from Alderwoman Sharon Tyus. And so, we hope that continues to grow. I really think that this is something that should be unanimous at the Board of Aldermen. So we are hoping that this board bill will grow that support. And we are looking forward to, continuing to do the work that we've done for 2.5 years. We're going to be at every committee meeting. We're going to be mobilizing our supporters and our members to testify, and we would like to see this done.
And it sounds like, you guys are in it for the long haul, but you're hoping this is going to be a relatively short sprint here. I mean, this bill calls for, if this can go through, this plan would go into place within about 180 days. So it seems like you've got a really good chance here. You're looking at by the end of the year. Is that correct?
That is our hope, that we will not walk into 2021 as a city with the workhouse. And so, I am very inspired by the amount of support that we've seen from community. We've seen, groups like Expect Us lifting up the mantle to close the workhouse. We've had dozens of partner organizations since this campaign began. And so I'm very grateful to the team of organizers that work on this every day, Inez Bordeaux and Jay Shepard, along with the Bell Project and Art City Defenders. And so we are hopeful, but we're organizers. And so it's not done until it's done. And we're going to continue to work to make sure that our amendments are, introduced and passed and adopted into this bill, and then that the total bill is voted on and passed in time to get this done by the end of the year.
Well, Kayla Reed of Action St. Louis and Close the Workhouse, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.